Yet another former prominent conservative is joining the effort to elect Kamala Harris. The former chair of the Republican House Conference, Liz Cheney, lost her 2022 primary after expressing some outrage over Trump's action on January 6th. She has remained a vocal Trump critic ever since, and yesterday at Duke University, she told students she would be voting for the vice president. And let's bring in our panel, Shelby Talcott and Jasmine Wright. Shelby is politics reporter for Semafor, and Jasmine is politics reporter for NOTUS. Ladies, great to see you here in Washington. I know you're always out on the campaign trail. So let's talk about Liz Cheney. Shelby, I mean, you've been covering Republicans for a while now. Does this make any difference? I mean, she's kind of the Republican that Republicans don't think is a Republican.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. I think, never say never. I do think that there's a sliver of Republicans like Liz Cheney who don't really like Donald Trump, maybe aren't sure of Kamala Harris's policies. Those are perhaps the people that she could influence. But in terms of influencing staunch Republicans, when I talk to Republicans, when I talk to Donald Trump's campaign about this, they basically say, well, she's not really a Republican anymore. And so that's, I think, how she's viewed by a wide swath of Republicans. So there are some people that she could influence. Sure. Is it going to be a huge amount? I'm not convinced.
I think it's less about Republicans, though, and more about independence for the Harris campaign, right? I mean, I don't think that they believe that a Liz Cheney endorsement is going to tap away from Donald Trump's base. Particularly, we know how hardcore they are. But they do believe in some ways that maybe this could help bring over the independents to the Harris campaign, particularly that 15% that potentially don't know how they're going to vote or don't know what Harris is going to do in office.
Yeah, I'm thinking about those kind of Nikki Haley voters, especially in the suburbs that we saw post, after she dropped out. A lot of them may not have been Republicans anyway, but looking for another option. Just amazing, though, this storied Republican family of saying she's voting for the Democrat. Let's talk about the debate, because it is endlessly fascinating to me that Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have never met before. They will meet in just a few days. Jasmine, I know you have some reporting about how Kamala Harris is preparing for this. This is her first presidential debate.
Yeah. Well, that preparation is moving from Howard University, where she's actually been prepping for months. She started prepping when she was still the vice presidential nominee for whoever Trump's nominee would be. And now it's moving to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where they're going to hold a debate camp where they can really do around-the-clock mock debates at full 90 minutes, trying to create muscle memory for her to get into the mode of being a debater, because they recognize that she's a rusty debater. It's been almost 4 years to the month that she debated Vice President Pence in Utah. And so they're getting her back into that mode, but it's also more intensive, trying to break her of things like fixating on details over preparation that we know that she's been known to do, kind of a part of her prosecutorial past, and trying to get her into that tit-for-tat moment. I think there's a couple goals for her. Yes, it is policy, trying to articulate her future forward policies. It's trying to disprove Trump's lies when they get personal, but also it's about temperament, trying to show the contrast between her personality and Donald Trump's, and really trying not to get bogged down when they believe that he may say lies about her that venture into the personal type of cross-the-line moments.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that preparation versus Donald Trump, who the campaign likes to tell us he doesn't need to prepare. And we saw that he had a lot of success in the last presidential debate. I mean, his opponent had to leave the race, essentially. Shelby, what do you know about kind of how the Trump campaign is thinking about this debate?
Yeah, I think they're viewing this debate in the lens as they have viewed every other debate with Donald Trump, and it is a very unique, is the way I would describe it, way to prepare, which is essentially almost a lack of preparation. And they've argued for months now that Donald Trump prepares best by going out and speaking to voters and doing his rallies and doing interviews, and he's answering questions, and that is basically a form of debate prep, as opposed to what Harris is doing, which is more traditional sit down, sort of going to Pennsylvania early and meeting with her team. Donald Trump is really doing, I wouldn't say none of that. He has sat down. They call them more policy events versus, traditional debate prep. So he is talking with his advisors about policy, but it is certainly not the traditional sit down, let's do a mock debate. He does not do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see, that worked for Biden. We'll see kind of how it plays against Harris. But we do know that the rules are set for this debate. Yeah. So The drama over the muted mics has finally come to an end. The debate over debates. I kind of want to hear from both of you, but how do you think that this muted mic might have an impact on the debate?
Well, I certainly know that the Harris campaign isn't necessarily happy about it, particularly because they wanted an instance in which they could recreate the "I'm speaking" moment that she had with Pence in 2020. That wasn't just off the cuff. That was, somebody told me, a crowdsourced line when they really thought about, okay, would he interrupt her? And if he does, how should they respond? And so they wanted to kind of recreate that moment when they know that Donald Trump is probably going to try to interrupt her, when they know that Donald Trump will probably try to in some ways intimidate her, a la 2016 Hillary Clinton. And so they wanted to create language around it, making her, again, not just comparatively seem better on policy, but also seem better on temperament. And so I think that they're going to have to try to figure out a different way to do that, like potentially having, we were talking about it earlier, having the press listen in closer or things like that, trying to create moments in which he seems out of control, even if they can't do that via the mics.
Yeah, I mean, the muted mic seemed to benefit Trump in the last debate.
Yes, and that is what I said, and I was actually surprised when President Biden's team suggested the muted mics, because you look at 2020, that was one of Donald Trump's big detriments, was the debates. Voters were turned off by how he acted during some of those debates. And when I talked to Donald Trump's advisors, they recognize that the muted mics have benefited him. And so they have been obviously very aggressive in saying, well, we had these rules for the CNN debate. You wanted the same rules as the CNN debate, so now we have them. So when I talk to Donald Trump's advisors, they say, yeah, of course, we're totally happy with the muted mics. Donald Trump himself, however, might not be, right? He has no problem saying publicly, I would do non-muted mics. But I think ultimately it has the potential to benefit the former president, for sure.
Yeah. And the point is going to be for the Harris campaign, can they goad him still to do things, even though while he's on stage, even though the mics are muted, goad him to kind of step out of his comfort zone or that comfortable place and do something that could look unseemly.
Right, yeah. It'll be interesting, too, if they do allow some, pool reporters in the room, too, to kind of pick up on some of that. Shelby, I know you have some new reporting, too, about the state of Florida. Used to be a swing state.
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate about whether or not Florida could go for Democrats. And I think a lot of the Democrats who believe that they have a chance this cycle are Florida Democrats. When I talk to people outside of Florida, they sort of acknowledge they're not convinced. And I think ultimately there's always cycles during every campaign where people are like, okay, well, what about Florida? What about Virginia for Republicans, for example? But until the campaign starts spending serious money in those states, it is essentially just wish casting.
Yeah, follow the money on those sorts of things, although the ballot measure might be interesting on abortion. So we'll see how that plays out.